Today's episode is sponsored by HireSuite. HireSuite CRM helps talent acquisition teams hire more people by automating your outreach and nurturing your talent pipelines, allowing your talent teams to be a lot more productive. If you haven't tried HireSuite, head to hiresuite.com and try it out for free.
Welcome to Crafty Sourcer. If you're looking for a raw, unfiltered podcast on all things sourcing in APAC, you've come to the right place. Grab a coffee or wine and join your host and other guests as we dive deep into the complex and ever-evolving world of sourcing, keeping you informed on insights, tools, and even at times, a healthy sourcing debate or two. Now, here's your host, Denise Pereira from Kaleidosource. Settle in and let's get crafty.
Hi, everyone. We are back with another episode of the Crafty Sourcer podcast. Our guest today is passionate not just about talent, but making sure equity and inclusion are at the forefront of what she does. She's currently leading a team across Asia for everything talent sourcing, proactively engaging communities within talent, market intel, and people analytics. She's also a big believer in talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. Let's get crafty and welcome Sarah Calverley. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, Denise, and thanks for reaching out.
It's so good to have you, Sarah. I know we've kind of been talking back and forth on LinkedIn, and we've caught up prior to the podcast as well. So it's an honor to have you, and obviously, for you to share a lot of your sort of experiences around D&I specifically that you've encountered in your sort of career as well. Let's get into it. We asked this of all of our guests, and for those that who don't know Sarah, quick intro, Sarah.
I hate doing intros because I feel like I'm so boring, and thank you for telling me I'm not, but literally I am. I'm all about my career. I've been working in this space for the last 14, 15 years and doing recruitment and sourcing and really developing my passion for D&I as I've learned more, particularly in the last sort of 5 to 6 years. And exercising that muscle and getting to know that HR muscle of myself and becoming a D&I practitioner through sourcing and through what I'm doing. That's pretty much me.
Wow, 14 to 15 years. So you've been through the war traps of talent acquisition, HR, D&I. So you've seen this shifting landscape happen over a decade or so. In terms of the value of sourcing, and I like asking this question because I like getting different people's perspectives around it. What does sourcing specifically mean to you, Sarah, in your world? And what's the value that you've seen it can actually bring to any organization?
I guess I was doing sourcing before sourcing was a thing in Australia. It wasn't really a job title, but that's what I was doing. I was supporting my colleagues through that support function of finding talent, creating talent pipelines of available talent or hot talent in those days. And we would create lists and kind of go after certain skill sets that we knew was going to be in demand. And so I started to develop a little bit more of a skill of searching and finding candidates and figuring out how to use different search terms to find them. And I remember going to a course, and I can't remember who put it on, but I went to this little course, and it was two speakers, and they were talking about different booleans that you could use. And I got a printout, and I laminated my printout and put on my desk and had all the boolean operators. And I found that to be so powerful because I could just do a quick search and find candidates that my colleagues really needed. So in those days, it was an agency. I'm talking like 15 years ago. And my next role after that was actually in a proper sourcing role. And I was working for a bank through an RPO. And we were pipelining huge amounts of like business analysts and then all these specific technical skills for the IT division. So I got even better at kind of figuring out how to use the different tools and platforms. And everything was free. We didn't have paid subscriptions to one single platform. It was literally just using Google search. And I followed like Glenn Cathy's blog to try and figure out how to be more technical with the sourcing. So that was kind of how sourcing technically started for me. But I think the value of sourcing has continued to grow and grow beyond that early stage support function of helping my, recruiter colleagues find candidates and supporting them, sourcing has actually become a leading edge role on its own, and a very specialized role of equal standing and equal kind of seniority to the recruiting as well. And when I think about, even in my past, I've done recruiting and I've done sourcing. I've always felt more empowered as a sourcer because I have a lot more data to be able to, talk to hiring managers, influence people, and really talk about what I know technically and use that data to kind of share, beyond who I'm empowered to share with. So as a sourcer, I think you get a lot of respect, particularly from technical hiring managers, even if they're really, really senior. They're willing to listen to you because you are the talent expert and you know about the talent. You know what talent is looking for, you know where to find them. You can sort of have that first line conversation with them beyond just an open role at the time. So they do come to really respect you as a sourcer and respect your advice and your expert opinion. So I think that's where the value has been. And when I've seen, functions, recruiting functions internally or in agency really grow, it's grown off the back of being able to pipeline talent and find niche talent and create those talent pipelines and talent pools that will actually feed the vacancies before they come up. So it's not just in time, but it's actually preparing for getting proactive and just being much faster to actually filling roles.
I love two things that what you said in Serafi. One is bullion. And in one of my workshops, I talk about going back to the basics of bullion. Because if you don't understand the basics of bullion, you can be hitting your head against the wall. You can try the most advanced operators out there. But if you don't understand and or not where you can use it, how you should be using it, you are going to just go down this big sea of, I don't know what the hell is happening. The second one where you spoke about the value, and you're right, it's definitely evolved from just putting, 100 people in a project and sending that off to the recruiter. Now there's definitely that equal footing with the recruiter and the sourcer. Like, as an example, the functions that I've worked in, I've loved working in those functions for one main reason is that I had candidate ownership. While I was doing a lot of the outreach, I was doing the engagement, the search aspect of it, but I also was giving them a consistent candidate experience from the time I started to the time they were handed over either to the recruiter or to the hiring managers from there. And I think that in itself can tell a compelling story around everybody's on the same page. So
Mhm.
thank you so much for sharing that, Sarah. Let's talk a little about, we understand, as an example, given the current economic climate, the hiring rates have slowed, inflation has introduced its new challenges. That's obviously impacting DE&I initiatives as well. In your role, how do you go about sort of discussing that importance of building a diverse talent pipeline with the business, with your teams, educating them that, this is where we need to go, this is what we must be doing, even though we know that, right now we're a bit stagnant with our hiring initiatives as well?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think let's zoom out, completely zoom out, and go right back to the beginning. And I'm thinking about, my very first job in recruitment. How did I come to doing that? And what's the meaning in that for me? And that's what I would be really interested in when I talk to other sources, other recruiters, is finding out what's meaningful about this job to you. So, regardless of the employer, regardless of the external circumstances, when I think about meaning and creating meaning in my job, it's not just placing 100 people or finding 50 people, right? It's actually making a difference to maybe one person at a time. Zoom right back to that first job working in an agency. In those days, I wasn't a specialist. I worked on literally any job that anyone would give me because that's what you did. And one of the first real hires that I made was someone who desperately, desperately needed a break. They just needed a chance to get back on their feet. They'd been knocked down. Life had absolutely knocked them down and it was totally unfair circumstances. And all that person was looking for was just to find a job that they would give their all to and, get them back on their feet. So I remember the feeling of being able to help that person. I think, within a very short period of time, they were doing such an amazing job that the employer actually came back to us and said, we want more people like this. And it was at the time a very low level kind of opportunity, but it meant the world to that person. And I'll never forget how that felt. It was a life-changing kind of moment. And I remember my colleagues saying, wow, you really helped that person. So I was high on that for weeks. And I can still remember all the details, who that person was. I remember the situation as it unfolded. And I want to repeat that. Like in my job, I want to be able to help people who deserve it. And occasionally we get that opportunity. Often we're trying to fill a role that has been given to us. The manager has an idea of who they want, and we go along the journey and we probably just work towards those outcomes. But I guess when you're thinking about yourself as a recruiter or as a talent sourcer, you have the opportunity to really make good happen in the world. And if you're not doing it at least at the minimum of being as diverse and inclusive as you possibly can be, then you're doing yourself a disservice and you're doing your work a disservice, right? So I think just starting there, like think about what's meaningful to you, what opportunities you do have. We have huge amount of privilege in the roles that we have to be able to understand a lot about the companies that we're working with, the hiring managers, the leaders of the company, and we also have the privilege of getting to know those candidates along the journey too. So how do you use all that and put all that together? I think the world is definitely waking up to how to be more inclusive through everyday practices and opening the gate wider. So we're looking at small things that we can do that don't cost us anything. One is, if you've got an employment form, can you remove something around the gender? Can you remove the fact that somebody has to input their gender into that field? Is it important? Does it make any difference? No. So we can take that out. And if you have any voice in your company, if you're working in the recruitment team or the HR team, you can ask them to take that out. You can ask for that to be removed and open the gate a little bit wider so that you're not turning off people who don't want to put that in, and you're not actually asking something that doesn't need to be asked. So it's small little things that do contribute, and companies are really investing in how they can progress the organization through diversity. They understand that there is money to be made, and they understand that it's becoming more and more important, especially for younger generations when they join companies. They want to be able to look up to role models and leaders, and they want to see people who are like them. So representation is so important, particularly at that careers fair level, or thinking about how people actually enter the organization. Who do they see? Yeah, so representation is so important. I don't think that anyone has necessarily placed intentional diversity on the back burner just because of what's happening in the world, but it does suffer the consequences of unintentionally becoming less of a priority when there's other things like more profit to be made or more focus on retaining seats in an organization. So it is important that for recruiters, HR people, talent sources, to really keep the light on and make sure that you are actually pushing your hiring managers to continue to keep things as inclusive as they can. Don't let them take anything away, obviously. If you're already having a really inclusive recruitment process or really inclusive application process, don't change that. So don't go backwards in times like this. Focus on what you can do to just keep the influence on, keep the light on. And then maybe you can't roll out a big diversity sourcing initiative right now, but maybe you put that down as a 3-month plan or a 6-month plan and put that in someone's diary. So put it in your leader's diary, put it in the hiring manager's diary, or the head of diversity or the head of HR. Schedule that time in and say, we're going to revisit this program that we wanted to do in 3 months' time, hopefully when things cool down a little bit in the market. So there's always going to be that opportunity. And I think the people who really keep the light on are the ones who are going to be known and be able to contribute that additional value over time.
Now, that's a really good answer in terms of, just holistically how we're looking at D&I. It's not just about gender, right? There's a holistic view of looking at it. And while you were speaking, Sarah, it kind of, my mind was just sort of working around as recruiters, as sources, we can absolutely do everything in our power to make sure that we are making people inclusive. Like, I remember going to Envato's Careers website. They have on their page over there, when you're filling out your application, pronouns. Like, who do you identify as? Just small things like that make a big difference. You feel inclusive. You feel like you're being included without being actually included in a way. But also biasness creeps in even when we don't want it to creep in. It could be from someone else's end. And I was actually talking to my partner about this the other day. We were talking about subtle biasness that happen, email addresses being a prime example. And I was like, oh, what if I apply with my personal email address? It has the year I was born in. She was like, have you realized sometimes that people might calculate and be like, oh, this is how old they are, and may not want to contact the person. I was like, you know what? That's brilliant. I was like, I didn't think of that. So there are biases that creep in. And what can we do with the role that we play? We talk about influence, we talk about data, we talk about so much. But how else can we influence other people to be thinking along the same lines? I remember when COVID happened, we were constantly educating our hiring managers that because everything was via video, please be mindful. We're all going through the same thing. Let's be very empathetic during the video interviews. Let's not have comments like this person didn't look enthusiastic or they look really down. Like, we can't have that. We're all going through the same thing. We're going through a pandemic right now. Everybody's locked in the same house, so we've got to take all of that into consideration. So my question back to you is, even though we do the right thing, how else can we get other people to do the right thing or think along the same lines?
It's such a great question, and it's called unconscious bias for a reason. It's completely unconscious, isn't it? And you have to face your demons. I think the first thing, number one, you can be the most D&I person in the world. You can come from every community and be intersectional. You will still have unconscious bias because you are a human being. So we have to recognize it, and instead of shaming each other or shaming ourselves, we have to recognize that that's a thing that happens. And to our best intentions, we have to bring those out into the open, bring it out into the surface. So the first thing is obviously recognizing that. And the second thing is saying, how do I get beyond that unconscious bias? Because I'm a sourcer. I'm the very first gate that person has to walk through my sourcing, the way that I actually go about putting my search together. So how am I doing that? How am I doing that most inclusively as possible? So what am I missing? And constantly challenge ourselves to say, what am I missing? I still do that today to this point. If I ever have to do a LinkedIn search or any type of search, I first ask, how do I make this as broad as possible so as not to screen anybody out? So that's what we have to intentionally look at. And then when it gets to the hiring manager perspective, you still have to do that work with them. So raising it up, talking about it, being really open about the fact that, hey, during a hiring process, there's unconscious bias. What do you think are some of those unconscious biases that might affect you as a hiring manager? I know you've been hiring for a while, but what do you sort of think about that? And just ask them the question. And you'd be surprised, people are willing to kind of go, oh, yeah, maybe I should change that next time, or that's actually the outcome that I don't want next time. During the pandemic, we had this pivot to care. So we were caring for each other more, we were more empathetic because we had to be, and because people knew the stakes, that it's a pandemic. We all thought it was a short period of time. And so we had this thing called care fatigue over time. We started to become fatigued by all that empathy that we were giving out. And I think that maybe we're in a little bit of that phase right now where everybody was a lot more educated during the pandemic season, that, we're going to be on video now and we're going to ask people, is it okay if I pronounce your name this way or that way? But maybe we didn't do that face to face. And now we're in this hybrid world. So how do we continue to keep that care without fatiguing ourselves, without going overboard on it? It's really just a matter of asking those questions and making sure that we are actually addressing it. There's so much to be gained by saying, I think in the past, I've made that mistake before. I've done the wrong thing, or I've maybe not been as considerate as I wanted to be. And the next time I do it, I'm going to completely change. And I think that's the most beautiful recognition we can give. Assume positive intent. I don't remember working with any manager in my career who intentionally screened people out. I think it was more around a lack of awareness, and also my own lack of awareness as a, as a sourcer, as a HR practitioner, to be able to have those really open conversations and asking more questions. So we need to become, recruiters and sourcers need to become really good at D&I consulting. Whether you are interested in it or not is another question, but we actually have that responsibility. We have to ask the questions, and sometimes asking the question is enough for the person on the other side to change their bias or their opinion or their point of view on something, or open up their worldview. And always conduct a debrief session. So after the hire has been done, are we going back and we're actually asking, okay, how did that go? From an inclusion perspective, how did it go? Did we get what we ultimately set out to achieve? Was the most inclusive practice as possible? What would we change next time? That's not going to cost any money to have that process built in place. So we should be doing that as a standard. We take a job brief, we should do a debrief.
Wow, those are such good practical insights. I was obviously on mute, Sarah, but you could please see me like nodding my head and I'm smiling because I was agreeing with everything you're saying. And you're right, we are in a very privileged position to influence a lot of those outcomes. It is more about lack of awareness. Nobody's doing it intentionally. It is lack of awareness. And when people become self aware, when you actually put the data in front of them, tell them about what's happening in the market, you will automatically see that they will look at you and be like, oh, actually, I didn't look at it like that. And now that you've said it, that makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
I've asked leaders, hiring leaders in the past before, like, who on your leadership peers, your peer group, who's out? Is there any out leaders? And just by asking that question has kind of opened up a different conversation that probably had never been asked before. I think we're in the position to ask those questions. I don't know any other career where you could be so bold as to go and ask someone you don't really know, those types of questions. So I think we should definitely take more of those opportunities and use our privilege and our voice to kind of open that up.
I love that, Sarah. Thank you for sharing that. Now, you've been with Microsoft for a while, which means you would have actually seen tremendous shifts in the DEI landscape. Are there any, or can you share any specific sourcing initiatives that was aimed at specifically increasing a lot more diversity within Microsoft?
So what I would say is, any company I've ever worked at or worked with in agency, and Microsoft is no exclusion, if it's happening in society, it's happening in the company. So, we have to be really aware that all companies are working on their diverse strategies, whether it's very open or public, or whether it's more behind the scenes work that's happening in consultation with, other knowledgeable consultancies. But yeah, from a diversity perspective, we spend lots of time making sure that obviously we have very inclusive practices. And when we think about how we approach, particularly women in tech, so women in tech is traditionally low. You can go on LinkedIn and you can do a search through all the talent that exists in Australia, all the talent that exists in New Zealand or globally or just Asia. And that number sort of sits between 20 and 30% is what we can tell usually before you get into really niche kind of skills. So just looking at that in itself tells you that you probably need to spend more time making sure that your candidate attraction is really focused on including those communities of talent, making sure that you have benefits and HR policies that support women in the workplace. And that's a whole other story, isn't it? That, once you get into a woman returning to work from maternity leave, etc., that's a whole other thing. But we've done some really cool things around returnship and addressing communities of talent that are female coming into returnship programs where maybe they've had a career break for a period of time. They can come back and get back to speed with current kind of tech skills and training and certifications, etc. So we've done lots of those types of things, and all sources and recruiters should be really well versed in how to go about sourcing for female talent and making sure shortlists are very balanced and well slated. But just again, zooming out of, any one particular company, when you think about the opportunities that exist from a sourcing perspective, it's not just finding female names. So we've done those types of things in the past, right? Some technical sources spent a lot of time building booleans that had all the names like Betty and Jane. And do you know what? It doesn't actually work. Like, it doesn't really yield any type of different result. All you're doing is just finding those specific names, and everybody has such unique names. So how is that an inclusive open gate practice, right? So we need to kind of think about those technical Boolean things too. And when you kind of zoom out, it's back to making sure your gate is as open as possible. When you're doing your searches, you're not providing anything that would intentionally screen out any particular candidates. And so once you've entered into your broad shortlist or your long list or your talent pool, how are you going to balance that? So there is always female talent out there. It's just about figuring out how you can not over pivot on certain skills and looking at transferable skills, etc. So that saying that's on my profile, which is, I don't know who originally said it, but it goes, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And that's really what it comes down to. You can be as sophisticated as you want as a sourcer. At the end of the day, what really works is 101 and just following basic practices.
That quote, I believe, was said by Laila Jana, if I'm saying her last name correctly. But you'd make a very good point, and this takes me back to a couple of years ago where I was asked to source for a role where there's hardly any females in that area, right? Infrastructure project managers. And in that team, it was heavily male dominated. So we had to take a very different approach. Now, the different approach, like you said, it wasn't just putting Betty, Jane, and all of that. We had to look at it from an inclusive side. Who else can we bring in there? So there were different ways that we had to come up with thinking about that. We shortlisted 3 candidates. We hired that person. She's still working with them. How I found this lady was she was at this sort of talent talk where people who were new to the country were looking for jobs, and she kind of pitched herself. She and I caught her for a couple of coffees, and she was one of the hires that we made. And it just, you have to be very open minded to not just how you search, but the people that you're talking to, the people that you have in your networks as well. And I think you also make a very good point around, we have this chance to do something different. We have a chance to make a difference in someone's life. When we talk about marginalized groups, we need to be partnering a lot more with them as well. We need to be asking them what are their challenges. Like when you look at migrants, they all are facing very similar challenges. They're not getting a shot in because they don't have local experience. So there's a lot that we can learn, and we can be an advocate for them as well. We can be their voice when they feel like they don't have a voice, right? So one more question from my side, and are there any market trends or data that you've used to shift your approach in how you and your team are doing a lot more D&I sourcing?
So we have more data now than we could ever imagine, and it's kind of like a source's dream to get to this point in your career where you can access. I access so many tools and products that I would used to dream about in terms of data platforms. More data doesn't equal better outcomes. That's kind of the learning along the way. I think the main thing that we've been able to do is spend more time confronting our own biases and our own lack of experience or lack of education or lack of understanding of D&I, and it's always evolving. So some of the practices that we spend more time talking about is really more focused on ourselves and our own learning and our own preferences and work styles, and making sure that our team is as diverse and representative as it can be. And that's one of the things that I'd say in my whole career. I've seen so many teams work really well together, but the best outcomes have come from teams where it's made up of great representation from different walks of life. And seeing that has yielded better results because your networks, your talent pools, your talent communities, and what you understand about those communities is so much better if you've actually lived that experience. And I'm currently going through this myself where I've returned to work, I've got a toddler. I'm like, how on earth did people do this? How did they do this when they had to work in an actual office 5 days a week? So I'm learning all the time, and you can learn through your lived experience. But that's why diversity is so important in sourcing. It's important that you're interested in it and that you understand it, but it's also important as a team that you're made up and representative of all the people that are in society, right? So that we can really understand that more. Yeah, data and market trends, we've definitely benefited over the years by understanding a lot more around where we can find certain groups of talent, how we can tap into them through communities and groups and networking events, etc. So we spend a lot of time obviously researching all of that. However, at the end of the day, what makes the most difference is just really, doing it through ourselves, like reparenting when you're a parent, actually doing this yourself and understanding what is affecting candidates that you're trying to reach out to and being really empathetic towards that, and then thinking around how you're going to approach those talents. Applications and using the systems that you have is probably the best place to start because that talent exists. They are probably sitting in your applicant tracking system right now, and you needn't go and find any net new talent. You just need to understand who's sitting there. And looking at all the AI tools that are coming down the pipeline now that can look at skills and implied skills and implied transferable skills, I think that's going to be such a huge game changer for us. And we're already starting to see that, new products and new platforms are coming out that actually address that. So the cool things that I'm really excited about is how we can talk to talent in a way that they understand and provide them or serve them up with opportunities that speaks to what they're interested in. And that's how we will boost and continue to make every workplace as, diverse as it can be.
Wow, Sarah, this has been a very insightful information, and I hope I can get more practitioners like yourself come in and talk about this topic because you said something early on around either people are interested in or some people are not interested in. I think we're in a profession where by default, whether we're interested or not, it should be a part of our DNA, right? So we have no excuses now. We are heading into 2024. We have no excuses not to be inclusive anymore. We've got the tools there for us. We have the mind, so we should be using it to the maximum capacity that we have as well. So Sarah, thank you so much for spending time and obviously sharing some of your insights around some of the stuff that you've implemented and obviously some of your key takeaways throughout your career journey as well. So thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Thanks, Denise. I hope it was helpful. And yeah, I'm always willing to have conversations, more conversations one-to-one around, how we can improve things and make things better for everyone.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening, and stay crafty until next time. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode, and we'll be back next week with another exciting episode. If you found this valuable, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Once again, happy sourcing and stay crafty. Until next time.